This lesson is going to focus on creating a reading response. And a reading response is just that. You are responding to something that you have read. And so it will be your original thinking, not a summary of what you read. Instead, it's going to be your original thinking about whatever it is that you've read. Our focus for this reading response is characterization. And to analyze a character, I want to first choose the character that I think I have the most to say about. And so, again, this is my original thinking about that character. And there's a formula that I've provided for you. It goes through to let you know kind of sentence by sentence what you need to do for a reading response. But remember that the overall goal of this reading response is for you to state your thinking on whatever you're focusing. So state your thinking about a character for this reading response. You're going to then kind of explain what is going on in the book is the next part over here, right? So just kind of give some circumstances so that it makes sense, right? Whatever you're about to explain. Then the next thing I want to do is select a quote that I'm going to use as evidence to support my thinking. And I want to make sure that I use correct MLA citation for that. After I put the quote into my writing, then I want to analyze how that quote supports my thinking right here in step 4. So again, I want to be really careful that I'm not just summarizing, here's what happened in the book. I want to explain especially why my thinking is important. And that last part, then I want to just make sure that I've made it clear that I'm going to link back my thoughts. I'm going to link them back to why they're important in the story overall. So I can answer questions like, what is this helping me understand better? Or maybe how does it connect to other events or other characters, other conflicts in the book? And then I could also maybe think about how I'm going to predict how it's going to impact later events as the story unfolds. So there's a rubric here that we can go ahead and take a look at as we're writing our reading response. But I want to focus for this lesson on showing you actually how to write that, right? So I took a very short chapter from a book called Bystander by James Preller. And so this is a short chapter, and I'm going to focus not on the protagonist, Eric, right here. Instead, I'm going to focus on the bully, or at least who I think the bully is going to be, which is a character named Griffin. So I don't want to just summarize what happened in this chapter and just say, hey, Eric met Griffin, Griffin was a jerk, and just kind of retell the chapter. Instead, I really want to analyze, why do I think that Griffin is going to be the bully? How does he talk to Eric? How does he talk maybe to the other people around him? What are his actions that prove to me as I'm reading that he is a bully? So first, I don't want to just say, I think he's the bully, right? So a tool that really helps me think about how to analyze a character is I use these character traits, this whole big list, because then if I can pick a word that I think describes a character, that helps me, because that's my thinking, right? It's my opinion about that character. And so that helps me to jumpstart my analysis and to have like my own thinking be in this paragraph. So I went through the whole list. You'll see here. I took out the word cruel because at first I thought maybe that would be, or evil, because he really is evil. It just kind of hints of it in the beginning. He's kind of mysterious in the beginning, so I thought maybe that word could describe him. He is popular, clearly popular with the other kids, because it's kind of a whole gang of kids that Eric meets in this chapter. But I think I'm going to use instead the word dangerous right here. I think that's the best word. And I know that it's the best word, especially because as you look through some of my thinking, as we went here, as I read through the chapter, I even wrote here that the mood of the scene is threatening and kind of dangerous. And so I think that is a really great word for me to use to describe my thoughts about Griffin, at least at this point in the story. It also is a great word when I think about, like, what do I think he is? I think he's a bully, right? And so that's kind of dangerous. I also liked the words arrogant, because he definitely is arrogant in this chapter. And I could also talk about how he's manipulative, or about how he's unpredictable. So those are the words that I want to keep those in my head, because those are the describing words that I am all by myself, right, applying to the book. It doesn't say in the book that Griffin is arrogant, or Griffin is manipulative, Griffin is dangerous. That's my thinking about that character because of the way that he acts and how he talks to the other characters. All right, so I know I'm on the right track now. So what I want to do then is go back and I've already written my paragraph here, so I can just kind of walk you through what I created. So I start, first of all, with a really clear topic sentence. So that's the first step in this formula, is I want to state in a sentence what is my thinking about that character. And so my first sentence here uses that word dangerous, right, from the character traits list. So I say the protagonist, Eric, meets Griffin on the basketball courts of his new school. So Eric is new to the school, right? Just moved there. And so he meets Griffin on the basketball courts of his new school and notices from the start that Griffin is dangerous. And so that's my thinking about that character. I want to then give some explanation of what is going on in the book, so that whoever is reading this, even if they haven't read this chapter, they can still kind of get a feel and get the gist for what's happening in this part of the book, so that my analysis makes sense to them. And so I started writing here, and this is a really important part that I want to point out to you, because I think as I learned how to write clearly and write well, I often kept feeling like, okay, I just got to get more details in there, kind of summarize what's happening. And so there is a part of that, which is why it can be a little tricky in this second step here. But I went through the text and saw all these great details I was noticing. Like Griffin comes across as a cute kid, right? Like he's one of those people who's like physically attractive, and so I think you kind of want to believe that he's also nice, but he's not at all. And so it describes him as having shaky hair, and and he's got all these soft features. He's got thick lips and long eyelashes. He appears to be about Eric's age, and he looks just like pretty. Like that's the word to describe him. He's an attractive kid, right? And so I went through and kept kind of skimming back through what I read. He doesn't look that big or that strong. He moves with an easy confidence. There's a toughness about him beneath the kind of pretty exterior that he has. And so those first details I thought about, like, okay, I should describe the character, right? So that you kind of get a feel for him. So I have these lines in here. Griffin is described as having longer, wavy hair. It's messy. He has long eyelashes. It almost makes him look kind of feminine. Eric sizes Griffin up, and he notices that he's not that tall or strong, but he does have a confidence that makes him seem like he isn't someone to mess with. So those are details that originally, when I wrote this paragraph, I was feeling like it would be important, right, to know that about him, to kind of picture that about this character Griffin, have these specific details. As I continue to write, though, I want you to see that this happens to all writers, is that when I reread my paragraph, I realized that you don't need to know this. You as a reader, you're reading my analysis, you don't need to know what Griffin looks like in order to see that he is dangerous. And so instead, I am cutting those details out. It makes my paragraph tighter. And instead, I'm going to focus on these specific details that really explain what's happening in this moment that make me think that Griffin is dangerous. And it really doesn't have anything to do with what he physically looks like. Sometimes in a story, it will, right? The author might give you specific details, like maybe the character is wearing a dagger necklace, or like something that's kind of a warning to the reader of like, oh, this guy's creepy and dangerous, stay away from him. So maybe if it was something like that, I could see including it, but I don't need it right now, so I'm going to cut it, right? So instead, I'm going to jump from Griffin is dangerous into after asking for Eric to toss his basketball to him, Griffin throws it, misses, but then he jokes about, well, I'm not very good at it, right? Griffin then directs one of the other boys to get it for him, and the kid obeys, which makes it clear that Griffin is their leader. This friendly questions and Griffin's smile disappear quickly. However, and Griffin asks to keep Eric's basketball. When Eric stumbles over a response, clearly wanting to avoid a fight he is outnumbered in, because there's a whole gang of kids there, Griffin coldly states, "You think maybe you have a choice." And that's on page 12. And so I want to point out a couple of things now, right? So how did I get there? So what I focused on is there's there's this language in here that the author uses. So Eric sensed that he would have to be careful, that this encounter could go either way, right? It could turn out okay, or it could go very bad. There's this threat hanging in the air. Nobody's really saying anything. I mean, it's not like Griffin is like, you want to go, right? Like, he doesn't say that right here. He's just kind of being like friendly, right? He grins, he shrugs, his eyes are smiling. I'm not really one of those basketball guys, right? That's the part where he jokes about being bad, that he messed up and looked like an idiot for throwing the basketball and he missed, right? Um, then it continues, and these kids are all, it's just kind of a creepy feel to the scene. And so the author is using these details like this hatchet-faced boy and weasel, right? And so Griffin smiles at Eric then and is like, don't pay attention to these guys, right? They think they're funny. And they are all kind of laughing, but there's like this meanness, this mean tone. And so Griffin makes comments like, I feel sorry for you, right? And Eric notices Griffin has a way about him, a certain kind of natural leadership that Eric respected. Words came easily to him. His smile was bright and winning. Eric felt almost envious, right? Griffin seems to possess this quality, like a presence. And so I really had to think about, like, what does that mean? And it's that kind of arrogant confidence of like, you're lucky to be around me, right? And so he's got this whole gang of kids around him that clearly, like, when he commands, get me that ball, and Drew does it, right? Like, he doesn't say, you get it. Like, you're the one who missed, you go get it. It continues, but then there's this kind of tense moment where Griffin is holding this ball. So he's got this basketball and just kind of like, hey, he asks, do you mind if I keep this? But he's not really asking. The ball, Griffin said, you don't mind if I keep it for a while as a souvenir. And so here's this kid who's like his sidekick, who's like, yeah, right? And trying to be funny and just whatever. It was annoying. It was an annoying part of the book. What? And Griffin is kind of stammering, or Eric kind of stammers. And then Griffin responds, what? Griffin interrupted, his face a mask now, hard to read. You think maybe you have a choice? And then all these boys kind of circle in closer, and it just gets a little bit fiercer, and the way a dog looks when its hackles are raised. And so definitely he's outnumbered, and he's not gonna, like, he's got to be really careful about what he does next, right? But the tone, I think that's part of it, is just this Griffin character had such a presence in this part of the story. And I really want to communicate, like, my thinking about this is that he's dangerous, right? Like, you're like, hey, run away, Eric. Like, this is not the kind of dude you want to be friends with. He's manipulative. He seems really smart and charming, but not in a good way, right? So my response then, to go back to it, I had explained to you a moment ago about how I need to take these details out that are describing the outside of Griffin, because it's just not as important to my analysis here. I want to focus on the fact that he's dangerous. And so that's where I zeroed in on, he asks Eric to toss the ball to him. He misses. He bosses one of the other boys around. But then these friendly questions, and Griffin's smile disappears quickly. And Griffin asks to keep Eric's basketball. And so that's the part, like, this whole part here is me kind of summarizing and explaining and giving some context about what's happening in that scene. Notice I did not write a whole bunch of sentences about everything that I just kind of took you through, right, in those couple pages of the chapter. So I just want to really zero in on what are the most important details. So then Eric stumbles over his response and he wants to avoid a fight that he's outnumbered in. And that's when, this is the most important part, I think, that really proves that he is a character that is going to be dangerous, that Eric's going to have to really be careful with him. And so I quoted exactly what Griffin stated out loud. So notice the punctuation is a little bit different here, because when I quoted this part, it wasn't just a description, right? Like right here, Griffin continued commanding the court. Like, that doesn't have any quotes around it. Instead, I want to quote something that Griffin actually says out loud. I don't want to quote this whole section of what Griffin interrupted, his face a mask now hard to read. Instead, I explained that and kind of wrote that out, right? Eric stumbles over his response. He wants to avoid a fight, and Griffin coldly states, and up here I explained that the friendly questions and Griffin's smiles disappear. And so there's that shift right there. And so I'm trying to set that up. So I think writing Griffin interrupted would be repetitive. So I just want to focus on what he said. But again, notice there's the quotation marks right here. And we're on page 12, right? So I know that I've got the right page. But these quotes, I need to punctuate that correctly. And so I'm quoting it in my writing, which is right here. So I keep those quotes to show you, the reader, that this is coming directly from the book. But anytime we have dialogue, you'll notice there's a single quote right there. So that single quote goes around whatever the specific lines the character says. I keep the question mark because exclamation points and question marks stay in the quote. I have let me fix it. I have a single quotation mark followed by a double quotation mark at the end. So anything inside the single quotes is what was actually said out loud, dialogue in the story. And then the double quotation marks go around whatever total I have quoted from the story, from the text. And then you'll notice there's one single space here, a parentheses, the page 12, and another parentheses, and the period ends my sentence on the outside. So that's how you're going to correctly quote something from the book. But I'm not done, right? It's not enough to just select a quote. It's an important part, right? I want to find evidence in the story to support my thinking. But the job of a writer is to then explain to the readers why that quote supports your thinking. Because I'm not reading the story, right? We're not reading that story, you are. And so you need to explain to us, help us understand how that quote supports your thinking. And so my next sentences do that, where I say the sudden switch in Griffin's behavior shows his arrogance and that he is a character Eric will have a lot of conflict with. So I'm trying to tell you why it's important to notice this right now. I think it's some foreshadowing in here that Griffin is going to be a definite antagonist for Eric. As the story continues then, so I'm trying to connect it back to why my thinking is important overall in the story. If you want some sentence starters to help you out with that, just scroll down past that rubric and you've got some sentence starters to help you write out your thinking about the characters and how to include some evidence in there too. So hopefully those are going to help you out. But in my sentence, as the story continues, it seems like Griffin will not be the stereotypical bully who is big and tough and everyone knows they're a jerk. Instead, it seems like he will be aggressive and violent, but that he also knows how to manipulate people and situations so that he gets what he wants. All right, so that would be a paragraph, a reading response using one quote. Now, if you are an 8th grader, or if you are a 7th grader who is looking to push yourself, or a 6th grader for that matter, 6th graders, you're more than welcome to try to include 2 quotes, but I know that this is a new skill to develop for you. So I'm definitely expecting everyone to have at least one quote to support your thinking. And then you explain why that quote is important to your thinking and why it's important overall in the story. If you are an 8th grader, then it is mandatory, it is the expectation that you are selecting a second quote and explaining why that supports your thinking as well. So here's my example of how to do that. I'm going to come in after this and I'm going to paste that right in there. So here's how you can get a second example into the same paragraph. I stated that Griffin's behavior shows his arrogance, right? And that he's a character Eric will have a lot of conflict with. So through all of this, the author uses figurative language about the gang of kids circling Eric like a noose, like vultures, and explains that, and here I have my quote, threat hung in the air. It was just a feeling Eric got, like a knot in his stomach. These chilling images create an uneasy feeling as the scene unfolds, and it emphasizes that Griffin is a threatening character. And so that fits right in here because my last part here explains why what I'm noticing about Griffin being dangerous, why that's important to the whole story. So you can just sneak in a second example there. Hopefully it's not too complicated. When you include a second example, you want to set it up a bit, right? Have your quote. So any kind of transitional, kind of connecting explanation maybe that you need to do in order to set up that second quote, like how is it building and connecting to the first quote you have, then include the quote. Notice I just have a single quotation mark here because that is coming from this section, right? Just kidding. It's on page 9, Mrs. Smale. Let's go. It is right here. So threat hung in the air, and I cut this part out, though no one had said or done anything wrong. I didn't think I needed that. I wanted to jump to, it was just a feeling Eric got in a knot in his stomach. Like that's an important kind of image right there, that nervousness. And that's how Griffin is having an impact on Eric, right? That's how he's kind of making him feel there. And so I took out just the threat hung in the air. I skipped over that next part of the sentence. And to show you that I did that as a reader, I used the ellipses right there. So threat hung in the air. Then it was just a feeling Eric got, right? And I explain why that quote supports my thinking. And then again, I'm explaining down here why it's important overall to the story, right? So all in all, that is a reading response. And just a quick reminder, this area right here in blue, you should be changing that so that it says your name. Please make sure you also change right here in blue that you're going to write the title. Titles of books go in italics or underline. And then make sure you include the author as well right after that. All right. If you have any questions, please use the resources that you have, but also please ask for help so that we can make sure that you're supported and you feel confident that you know what you're doing. All right. I can't wait to read them. Thanks for doing your best.